Hi, I'm Dave Lee, coordinator of the William M. Starkle Planetarium at Parkland College. And you're probably wondering what I'm standing in front of here. Well, we're going to show you, and we're going to find out if the answer, my friend, is indeed blowing in the wind on this edition of Surrounded by Science. All right, we're out here at the outskirts of the Twin Groves Wind Farm with Randy Lloyd. How you doing, Randy?
Wonderful, Dave. It's a beautiful day to be out here, isn't it?
It's fantastic, and we've got some wind turbines here in the background. We're here at the western edge of the wind farm. Is that right?
That's correct. This is the little town of Benjaminville. It's a ghost town, but it also is the western end of the Twin Groves Wind Farm. We're about 5 or 6 miles from the Bloomington Normal Airport, which dictates where the wind farm stopped. But it's also a very important place because this is one of the four things that you have to have a wind farm. You have to have a way to get the energy off of the wind farm. It doesn't do any good to generate it and then not have any place to send it. So what happens is the electricity comes from all the 240 turbines that are to the east of us. This is tower number 1, and that's tower number 2, and they go on. 22,000 acres underneath the turbines, about 18 miles east and west and 5 or 6 miles north and south. But you have to have a place to get that energy off of that wind farm. So what happens is the energy is collected at various substations, and it comes across the wind farm on the poles that you see that have the brown poles that have 3 arms on one and 2 on the other. And it comes to this structure over here, which is a substation, a transfer station. It's Horizon's energy to that point. And as soon as it hits this transmission line that goes across here, which is owned by Commonwealth Edison, and it goes to Chicago, and from there it is sold on an international electron market. There's a market for electrons like there is for corn and soybeans and wheat. I didn't know that. You learn something new every day. And
so look at the electron futures in the paper or something like that.
Exactly. If you want to run your air conditioner when it's 95 degrees, you want to know where those things are, and that's basically what it amounts to. It goes to anywhere from Saskatchewan to Florida to current electrical companies that have demands at a specific time.
So most of, or maybe all of the energy that's generated here isn't used here.
None of the energy that's generated here is used here. It all goes off the farm. And that was an issue with some of the people in this area when the Twin Groves Horizon Wind Energy, who owns the farm themselves, when they came here and started to develop the farm, that was one of the issues. Well, where's the electricity going to go? Well, it's going to go on this transmission line up to Chicago. And of course, that was immediately translated into, we're giving this electricity to Chicago, we're going to provide electricity for Sears Tower and all that stuff. And, it goes to Chicago like, you and I go to Chicago and then we go to Door County or we go to Michigan or we go someplace else. It goes to it, but it doesn't stay there. It's sold on the market. It goes wherever is needed at a particular time.
Which I guess raises the question of why is the wind farm here if the energy is going to be shipped elsewhere? What is special about this place?
Well, this is a beautiful place. This is a great place. And this answers, we have the other 3 components that you have to have a wind farm. First of all, you have to have a place to get the electricity off the farm, but you also have to have a steady source of wind. And we're standing here today, and if we look off to the southwest, that's where 60% of the wind comes from the southwest in this area. Today it's coming out of the northeast, is why it's a really pretty day. But we're on top of the Bloomington moraine, and from LeRoy, where you and I met, up to this point, I told you, we're going up to the front of the moraine. It was like a little bit of West Virginia here in Illinois. We gained altitude of about 150, 200 feet at that time from where LeRoy is to where we are here at the top of the moraine.
And just for the benefit of our viewers, what is a moraine like? How did this get here?
Well, this moraine was deposited here along with many others, a series of moraines that go from here. There's 7 of them between Pontiac and the Funks Grove rest stop, but this one happens to be the Bloomington moraine. And it was deposited 25,000 years ago by the glaciers that came out of Hudson's Bay. It took 15 to 25,000 years for those glaciers to move down here. This was 100,000 years ago. The Illinoisan glaciers took care of most of the state. The Wisconsinian glaciers took care of this portion of the state, and it goes down to about Shelbyville is the farthest reach of it. But every time you get one of these high spots, the glacier would stop here and then it would melt back, and then a couple of years later, it would a couple hundred or 1,000 years later, or whatever the time span would be, it would move forward a little bit more. And every time it stopped, left a moraine. It's kind of like when I tell kids, it's like taking your hand and putting it in a sandbox and pushing your hand forward and stopping. You're going to leave a little pile of sand there, and that's a moraine.
So we're on that pile of sand.
We're on that pile of sand, which happens to be really good topsoil, as a matter of fact. This is very rich McLean County soil up here. We call it a kind of a black gumbo type soil. It's a silty loam. It's a good portion of it is the drummer's silty clay, which is her state soil. But because it is rolly, as you can see, there's quite a bit of change in the topography as you look out across here. There's a lot of drainage issues, and if it was not for our friends in Chatsworth who developed field tile, we probably wouldn't be farming this, but historically it holds a lot of value to us. So that's why we're on the moraine, and that's why we have the wind farm here. We have a steady source of wind. The wind comes across the prairie, hits that moraine, and comes uphill and increases in speed. I don't know what the physics is behind that. You might be able to tell me, but it happens to do, and it hits these turbines, and it creates this energy, this wind farm being a prime location here.
Now, I know you give lots of tours here, and we've started our tour here at Benjaminville. Isn't that right?
Right. This is Benjaminville. It's kind of an interesting history of this area. I've probably brought more people here on a tour than have lived in Benjaminville when it was a town. But in the old, there's nothing. They always say there's nothing new under the sun. In the 1850s, the government gave the state of Illinois a stimulus package. They gave them 28,000 acres in what was called the Swampland Act of 1850. Now, if you were given 28,000 acres and the Swampland Act, would you be jumping for joy?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this area that we're looking at was that Swampland Act. And McLean County at that time was established, and they didn't hold on to it very long. They sold it for the equivalent of about $4.43 an acre. And the land we're standing on today is worth $8 a square foot, so you can see how much time has changed.
So somebody's made some money somewhere along the line. Right?
Well, yes, and it went to a good cause. The money they made, they sent $70,000 of it to establish what was called at that time the Normal University, which was a couple 147 years later my alma mater, Illinois State University. And the balance of it in the $58,000 range was given to the townships to establish their township schools. And that's why when you're driving through the country, occasionally you'll see an old one-room schoolhouse that is now a private home that is left on those sections. Each township dedicated a section of ground to the education of the kids in that section. So, and there's a few of those that are still around in the county and out in the country, and they're usually private homes by now. But to get back to Benjaminville and why it is Benjaminville, in 1855, a couple by the name of John and Sarah Benjamin moved into this area, and they homesteaded here. This was the West. In the 1850s, this was the West. They built a farm here, and in 1857, two brothers, Chris and Fred, moved into this area, and they went to work for John and Sarah. John and Sarah didn't pay them anything. They worked for their room and board, and they were hardworking, industrious young men out in the prairie out here, and they worked really hard, enjoyed living out in the country and starting a farm, working on the farm. Everything was fine until 1860 when Susanna Johnson Hull moved into this area. Now, Susanna was a school teacher. She was Dutch, she was Scott, and she was Lutheran. And she came to this area as a school teacher, and of course, being a strong-willed, single-minded young lady, she attracted the attention of both Chris and Fred. And Chris and Fred both courted her, but Chris, being the more aggressive, I guess you might say, the more forward-thinking, we'll use that term, asked her to marry him. Susanna said, yes, I will marry you, but the fact that you are a Lutheran is not a problem. The fact you are a sharecropper is. So he decided he'd better get some land, and fast. So he and his brother went to John and Sarah Benjamin, and for $18 an acre bought 100 acres and built a house. And a couple years later, Chris and Susanna were married, and they moved into this house, Mr. and Mrs. and brother Fred. And that's the way this family lived the rest of their lives. Mr. and Mrs. and brother, brother-in-law, and soon-to-be Uncle Fred lived in this home together. Chris and Susanna had 7 children. They only lost one child, this girl who was number 6. But number 5 is kind of the interesting person for this area. His name was George, and he was a hard-working young man, and he also had a business head on his shoulders. And he would come to you and say, "Gee, Dave, you got a great barn over here. You can see this barn could very well have been yours on this farm, and you got a team of horses. But what happens if something happens to that barn? Lightning storms out here, or tornadoes, or whatever. If you give me some money, I'll invest that for you, because I'm a smart person, and you're probably not quite as educated as the rest of the people." It was school was secondary basically to farming, and so we know that as insurance. Well, what happened was that George Jacob Maherl grew that little insurance company into what we know as State Farm Insurance today.
As far as the wind farm goes, where are we headed next?
We're going to go to the Harlan Bilta Family Farm Trust. It's a farm that is in trust with my wife and her two brothers. And then she and I own some of the land outright, and so we're going to be, we have 4 turbines on our ground. In 2001, the company came and asked us if we'd be interested in having wind farm be involved in the project, and my brother-in-law Mark was the person who happened to answer the door that day, and he thought this might be a good opportunity, so he and his brother Brad came to my wife Diane and I, and we sat down in our family room and talked about it, and we thought, well, this might be good for us. And we asked them how many turbines we could possibly have, because our farm is a little over a mile long but not real wide, about 240 acres, 185 tillable. And they said, well, you could probably have 4 turbines on that ground. And we thought, well, what are the chances of everybody else having them? They said there's going to be 240 on this farm, and we thought, well, if we're going to have them, if we're going to see them in other people's farms, we might as well see them in our field.
Get the ball rolling to a new career with an Eastern Illinois University degree at Parkland College.
Parkland and Eastern really made it work for me.
Now I'm taking Eastern classes on Parkland's campus. I'm working on my bachelor's degree from Eastern without commuting.
Thanks to Parkland and Eastern, I'm reaching my goals.
For more on Eastern at Parkland, call 217-351-2543.
So now we're here at the base of one of these turbines, and this is a tremendous feeling just being underneath one of these things. So why don't you just tell me a little bit about the turbine itself, its size, and how fast it's spinning?
Sure, be glad to, Dave. This is Tower 77. There are 4 of them on our property, and they're numbered. They each have their own 911 address. This is 77, 78 is in the background, 79 is up on this corner, and 80 is behind this tower that you can't see. Each tower is 263 feet up to the top of the nacelle. The nacelle is the little cabin that's on top that holds the generator. The blades are 135 feet long, which makes it, when it's at the blade is at the peak of its arc, it's over 400 feet off the ground, which is about 100 feet taller than the Statue of Liberty. The circumference of the arc that the blades make is about 50 feet longer or wider than the wingspan of a 747. So they don't look quite as big, but when you're standing underneath them, they're a pretty good sized piece of equipment.
So I've driven down Route 9 before, but I've never been this close, and this is almost kind of eerie.
Yeah, it is in a way, especially on a windy day like this with the clouds. You look up and you don't. The tower looks like it's going that direction, when the clouds are actually going the other direction. It kind of gets you. Underneath us here is a large block of concrete that we estimate to be 40 feet wide, 40 feet long, and 40 feet deep, and it's about 15 feet underground to start with. So there's 15 feet of topsoil underneath, or soil between us and that block of concrete. As you look at the base of the tower here, you see the bolts that you see sticking up. There's a corresponding bolt inside the tower for each bolt outside, and that is all cased in a column of concrete, and they're bolted down, and then the tower is built up from there. I had an engineer come out here one day and tell me that this is a really well-built structure, because if you see the doorway, that would be the weakest point on that structure, will be where the doorway is, where they've cut that oval. But that's been double reinforced. You can see the extra layer of steel on the outside of it, and the how it's been very carefully welded. He was very impressed, so that made me feel very good too. So each tower is inspected about every day. There's a crew of young, non-claustrophobic people who work here. 54 people work full-time on the wind farm. As you climb up inside the tower, there's a ladder that goes up inside the tower, and there's landings periodically that you can get off and climb up as you go up, so that if you would happen to slip, you would only fall down to that landing 20 or so feet rather than 263 feet, and avoid the sudden stop at the bottom of the tower. Each of the towers has a 1.65 megawatt generator in it. So they rate us that this farm could provide all the electricity for 120,000 homes for a year, all the 240 put together. All the electric cables come down the tower and go across the fields and buried in the fields over to the nearest substation, which in this case is just over the hill to the trees that you see on the horizon. And from there taken out to where we were at Benjaminville and put on the international market.
So 1.65 megawatts for each turbine, and how many turbines are there again?
240 turbines, 1.65 megawatts for each one.
And I know you said before they were thinking of expansion. What are the expansion plans?
I'm not sure how big those towers would be. I would imagine that since the same companies, they'll be like these, but they might have larger generators in them, because it's like computers. This is 1.65 program. What we anticipate, we have a 30-year lease with the company, that before that 30 years comes up, they will come and increase the generating size, put new generators in these, which will do two things. It'll increase the amount of money we get as a leaseor to the company, that we get paid the $5,000 per tower per year, plus a little cost of living increase. We get paid that will increase as the size of the generators increase. And that's the first thing. But the second thing is that will also increase the taxes that the company pays to the county. They pay taxes on everything that you see that's under limestone here. It's leased from us to them. Then that will increase the amount of taxes they'll pay, which is a good thing, because this will help the school system. This is that's the biggest slice of that pie. So
as a property owner, this is a profitable thing.
One of the things we thought about was we asked how much ground we're going to lose to the turbines, to the wind farmers from our farm here, and they said about 4 acres. Well, they were pretty close, because it's been surveyed, and we lost 4.1 acres. There's 4.1 acres of ground here dedicated to it. The turbines, as you can see, they don't take up much space. What takes up the space is the limestone roads, the access roads. So we were, at every step along the way, we were given compensation for the amount of crop that was taken out based on what the average yield is for this farm, for this county. They knew how much acres of corn, how many acres of soybeans they took out in 2006 when they started the project. We started in 2001. It took till 2006 to get all the legal things taken care of. Construction started in August of 2006, and that was probably the saddest day of our life, Dave, because they cut through our corn crop right down to the ground. And if you remember 2006, we had a great crop. Yeah, it was terrific. We had a beautiful crop of corn and soybeans. It was a great harvest that year. But we figured for $20,000 a year with no inputs, we don't have to do anything. Which if we were farming, we'd have to put in all those inputs. So how much corn do we have to grow on 4 acres of ground to make $20,000 a year? And it was pretty much a no-brainer. And we decided we would go along with the project, and we're happy we did.
I noticed that some of the turbines out here aren't moving. Is there something wrong with them, or what kind of maintenance is done on these? You did say they made stops for each turbine once a day, but talk to me about maintenance.
I've noticed since I've been out here this summer quite a bit. There's a tower over here that's not running right now, and you can see how the blades it's not facing the wind, and the blades are feathered so that there would be like the prop of an airplane on the ramp, that they're flat against the wind. They've been doing a lot more maintenance on them this summer. They've hired some other crews that have come in. And they also have some interns. Horizon's been very good about hiring college interns who are interested in engineering, whatever kind of background they would have. And they're doing a lot of maintenance work on them, replacing some generators, replacing some of the transformers on the ground, doing some lubricating work, because you can pretty well count on the weather being pretty decent right now, and they'd rather do this now than the dead of winter, I'm sure. So yeah, there's some maintenance work being done on them, and that's fine. You know, as when they're being checked, that makes us feel safe and secure that people are watching out what's going on out here.
And maybe a silly question, but given here in the Midwest how our wind shifts all the time in direction, how do the turbines know which way they should be pointing?
On top of each turbine is a weather vane. The weather vane is connected to a computer inside. You know, we're in the computer generation, computer age. That computer then runs an electric motor, which causes the nacelle to turn into whichever way the wind is going. Or if the wind gets too high, they say the break-off point is about 55 miles an hour, that it will shut off and turn so that the nacelle is perpendicular to the flow of the wind, and the blades will then rotate and feather so that the wind is blowing past them.
So automatically, nobody has to tell it to do that.
Automatically, it knows to do that. Each tower, you know, this is Central Illinois. This is tornado country. Each tower can stand a 200-mile-an-hour inline wind, and because of the moraine, tornadoes in this area, I don't know what happens as the moraine goes to the west of us and then arcs, turns around and goes up towards DeKalb. That moraine has some kind of an effect on severe weather, because we get storms here. I mean, there's no question, we get rain and thunder and lightning and all that kind of stuff, but we don't have quite this tornado issue that we have in other areas of McLean County as we have right here in this area.
Now, I know, since there's been lots of discussion about these wind farms, that one of the issues is always noise, and I don't know if the listening audience can pick this up, but we're standing, for the most part, underneath this thing, and I can hear it. It's I wouldn't call it real noisy, but any issues with noise?
It's kind of like standing next to the ocean. You know, it's kind of like standing next to the beach. You know, after a while, you don't hear it. You and I don't have any problem hearing each other talking. It's kind of a background sound. And actually, in some cases, the wind blowing through my left ear here is louder than that turbine is. The towers are located where they are for a specific reason. On the top of the tower, you can see there's a little triangular structure. That is actually the radiator that cools the oil that cools the generator. But on top of that, when you can see on this tower behind us up here, there's the navigation light. At one time, when they first started the farm, all the navigation lights would go on at the same time. 240 lights. They don't blink. They turn on, they turn off, they turn on, they turn off. They appear to blink because the blades are passing in front of them. But it was interesting. It started quite a few conversations among airline passengers coming into Bloomington at night, when 240 red lights would light up out on the prairie. They said, "What is the world of that?"
And you can see them from 74 as well. I've noticed those.
That's right. On a really clear night, you can see them from the Mansfield overpass. But so we always thought it would be really cool if they had put the towers so they would light up, you know, "Welcome to Bloomington Normal." But that was impossible, because they're all in a specific place for a specific reason. And one of the factors is they have to be 1,025 feet apart, away from each other, because they do rotate in the wind. At some time, two towers are going to be in a straight line with each other. I pointed at one of that situation today. There were three of them in a straight line, and the wind was blowing right past all three of them. If that would be the case and they were closer than 1,025 feet, the turbulence from the upwind blade would damage the downwind blades, and the warranty would expire. You'd understand that. Flamini is a physics teacher. The other reason is they have to be a certain distance away from power lines and roads and buildings and farms and towns and those kind of things. And they also have to be, remember, we're on top of the moraine. It's swampy up here. It can be, the Swampland Act of 1850 was for a reason. There are low spots where they don't want to put the towers, and there are also spots where they do not want to get them because it's wet.
How long does it take to put one of these up on the average?
It's hard to say, because they didn't just put one tower up and then go and build the next tower. It's like, you know, developers building a lot of houses. Yeah. You know, that's a stair-step operation. They dug the pits. Well, they opened the roads, then they dug the pits to put the concrete in. And then they brought in a crane that built up to just about to where the tower tapers. And that crane also put the blades on the hub that goes onto the nacelle. But a lot of this work was done at night because 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning is the time that the weather is actually the calmest. As the thermals stop, the sun sets down, the ground cools off, and the environment cools off. So a lot of this work was done at night, and you can wake up and your bean field would look like a baseball park with all the spotlights that they brought in to light the place.
As we stand here beneath this mammoth thing, I'm going to ask you to look in your crystal ball just for a minute. Where does wind energy fit in?
The studies that I've read say that right now 20% of our electricity comes from nuclear power. In 20 years, it's a real easy formula. In 20 years, 20% of our power will come from wind energy. A gentleman I had here the other day said that he's read that they are having, and he's heard from manufacturers that they can't keep up with the demand for manufacturing the generators. These generators are Vestas. They came from Denmark. And Denmark is decades ahead of us. They're taking electricity out of turbines that are sitting in the North Sea and have been for decades. The towers came from Louisiana, of all places. The blades came from Australia. But there's and so you look at the carbon footprint of transporting these things that distance to a rail yard in the northwest corner of Normal, where they manufacture Mitsubishi motors. How can that be impacted? Well, if you go down Route 51 south of Bloomington to the town of Clinton, you don't even see it. A company called the Thrall Car Company that is now used to manufacture and remanufacture railroad cars. They've retooled their plant because the railroad doesn't go through there anymore, and they're making turbine parts. So they make the turbine towers are being made down here in Clinton, 30 miles south of Bloomington. So imagine shrinking that distance that we've been able to do. And the blades are made, and I'm not sure exactly where they're coming from now. GE is making the generators, so we're slowly getting up to speed and saying, this is something we're going to have to do in the future. Our family looked at it and said, I'd rather see one of these on our tower, on our ground, than the cooling tower of a nuclear power plant. This is an agricultural area. There is wildlife around here. Some of these farmers are still raising livestock that are going to go to market. A nuclear power plant goes critical, and you can't sell anything. So there's some good things about it. It's just like computers were 30 years ago. How do we know what was going to happen? Well, this is a growing trend, I feel, and we're happy as a family to be part of it.
You certainly enjoy your job. That's very obvious, and you're quite knowledgeable about all of this. If someone else wanted a tour, what could they do? Can you arrange a tour for someone?
I'm more than happy to, Dave. I've had many hundreds of people out here, and in one opportunity I had to bring 41 military people from the National Defense University, and they were from all 41 different countries. The tour guide and I were the only people that spoke English. Well, we were the only Americans, and they had a wonderful time out here. They were asking about vector forces. You should have been here. They were asking about vector force and all this stuff because they're all engineers. I said, I'm a fourth grade science teacher. Was my career was when I was in the public school system for 35 years, but we had a great opportunity. We talked about standing out here in a bean field in a hot August afternoon about, we're all people on the same planet, and as military people in the military family that I'm from, we all would like to be unemployed in that regard, and it was a really bonding experience. But tours, I'm more than happy to take. I've had third graders up through senior citizens.
And how should they contact you?
They can contact me at the University of Illinois Extension in McLean County. At www.mcleanextension.org. My email is Lloyd, LLOYD, and the number 1 at Illinois, ILLINOIS.edu, or you can call 309-663-8306 and ask for Randy the Wind Guy.
Randy the Wind Guy. Randy Lloyd, we thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Been my pleasure. A day out here is better than any day in the office.
And thank you for joining us. For Chris Foster, I'm Dave Leake. Thanks for being here on Surrounded by Science.